At the time of the earthquake and tsunami, they had 3 reactors that were in operation and 3 reactors that were idle for maintenance. Of the 3 reactors that were in operation, 3 out of 3 had meltdowns. Of the ones that were idle, 1 out of 3 had a meltdown. So this is not a very good indicator of the quality of this design. With this design, if it loses power to the cooling pumps, it will have a meltdown if it's in operation, and it may have a meltdown even if it was not in operation. This is scary. But what's scarier still is this is no surprise. The NRC scientists had figured out and published a report in 1972 that said Mark I reactors have a 90% probability of having a meltdown if they lose power to the coolant. We saw 100% out of 3, so 90% is statistically consistent with that. The prediction was exactly right. These reactors failed as designed. They were designed to have a very small containment. Why? Greed. It was to keep them cheap. They were sold as a cheaper alternative to the other designs. They didn't take up as much space. They didn't require as much concrete. These nice small designs were supposed to be the wave of the future, but instead, even before many of them were put into operation, it was known that the design was fatally flawed. The problem with the design is that there are 2 main parts to the reactor. There's this big upside-down light bulb shape, big bulb at the bottom and a tube up at the top. And that's where the main reactor core sits. And it's a boiling water reactor. It's supposed to boil water in the inside, produce steam which goes out pipes, runs to the turbines, and that's where the electricity gets generated. But if the reactor gets too hot, the water boils too fast and too much pressure builds up, and that light bulb-shaped dry well, it's called, would crack. And so it was designed to have a donut-shaped ring called the torus, which means donut-shaped. The torus sits underneath the main reactor, and it's half filled with cold water. And when the pressure builds up too high in the main reactor, steam blows off into the torus, bubbles through the steam, which cools the steam and hopefully condenses it. Condensed steam, the water, doesn't take up nearly as much space as the steam, and the pressure is reduced. And that was GE's idea for how to make a small reactor. The problem is it was figured out that if you got the temperature up high enough, this wasn't enough. The torus was not going to be capable of holding in all of that steam, and you'd still have the reactor crack and spew out radiation. And so what was the fix? It's been almost 40 years since they figured this out. They have plenty of time for the NRC to tell people to go and fix this, to tell Fukushima to fix this, to tell the reactors in the United States with this design to fix this. And we have 23 reactors in the United States that have this design. Luckily, the closest is that one in Nebraska that's underwater. So there aren't any close to here. The only real fix that they've had to this problem of accidentally releasing radiation when they lose coolant, believe it or not, is to intentionally release radiation. Does that make any sense? The purpose of containment is to contain the radiation. You're not supposed to let the radiation get out of the reactor. But what they did was they added vents to the torus that if they thought it was getting too hot, the operator could push a button and open up vent and blow off steam into the atmosphere. And you may have heard in the day or so after the accident that they were saying we may have to release radiation to the atmosphere. That's what they were talking about. They were talking about making the decision of pushing that button to release that radiation in order to release the pressure. The thought being that an intentional release of a limited amount of radiation is better than an unintentional release of an unlimited amount of radiation. Now, in the case of reactor number 1, They did very quickly after the tsunami. They pushed that button, and they were releasing radiation. And the temperature came down as expected. And the operators said, maybe the temperature is coming down too fast. If you let something cool too fast, it can crack. So we don't want that to happen. So they closed the vent. And then it melted down. And so one thing that's been suggested as a possible fix is that these vents should be changed to be automatic. That if the pressure is too high, based on the pressure, it will automatically open up and there's no chance of operator intervention, operator mistake. There are other possible things that could be done. But these reactors all around the country are not safe. They will have problems. Now, as I said at the beginning, we have to ask, is Fukushima the only possible disaster like this? Does it take an earthquake and tsunami to cause a reactor to lose coolant? No. Santa Susana melted down because the cooling pipes clogged. 3 Mile Island melted down because there was a leaky valve. A valve that was accidentally left open. And it was complicated by an operator error that they misunderstood what the indicators were saying and they left the valve open. And by the time they figured it out, too much coolant had leaked out, they didn't have coolant, and it melted down. Chernobyl melted down and exploded and burnt because there was a theory that perhaps if they lost power to their cooling pumps, that the diesel generators that were there for backup wouldn't power up fast enough to be able to control the reactor. And so they did an intentional shutdown to test this theory of whether or not it would work. And it failed. Failed disastrously. Now that was also complicated by human error. They had protocols that said that if there was any sign of anything going wrong, they should immediately turn the reactor back on. But the operators said, well, no, let's wait it out and see a little bit longer and see if we can get this under control. And they couldn't, and it exploded and burnt. And so there are a lot of different ways, operator error, clogged pipes, leaky valves, that you can lose coolant. Right now we've got the Cooper reactor in Nebraska, Mark I reactor, that is inches away from having the flood level reach the point that they need to shut it down. Now, if the flood level gets a few inches higher than that, it will get to the cooling pumps and the diesel generators, and they will lose coolant. And maybe by shutting it down hours or days before it reaches that level, it'll be more like the shut-down reactors with only a 1 out of 3 chance of meltdown instead of the operating reactors with a 90% chance of meltdown. But there's a good chance that if that flood level keeps going up at Cooper will melt down, and we will have our own Fukushima. So this is a very serious problem. So what, Dave?
Okay, 2 things. One, listened to an NPR program recently on the nuclear regulatory, what's it, agency? NRC. And they have said that the number 1 cause of a nuclear plant failure is fire. They have very rigorous regulations as to how they're prepared to prevent and control fire. And I think they said 50% of the reactors, not Mark I, but 50% of the reactors in the country are not in compliance to that regulation.
Right.
And number 2, it's very hard to make anything foolproof because pools are so resourceful.
Right. So Dave points out how resourceful pools are, and that the NRC has found that half of the reactors are not able to recover from a disaster such as a fire. And in addition to that, there is also news in the past day or two that a third of the reactors are leaking radioactive hydrogen, tritium. And the thing about the tritium is it moves faster than other isotopes. And so if they're finding it in the water, there's a good chance that other things are coming up behind it. And so it's a very bad sign that so many reactors are having leaks. They are not doing an adequate job of controlling these problems. So what should we do? So there is a petition with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to suspend the licenses of all Mark I reactors in the United States, all 23 of them. And there are actually a few others that are like Mark 1.5 that are also included in the petition that are similar enough in the design that the group doing this, Beyond Nuclear, feels that those should be suspended as well. And so this was submitted as an emergency petition back in April, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission turned it down as an emergency petition and is treating it as a regular petition. They finally held a hearing on it a couple weeks ago, and I sat in on the conference call for that hearing. It was very interesting. Beyond Nuclear and the other groups presenting did a really great job of presenting this to the commissioners. And the commissioners had a few interesting questions to ask. And my general impression of the commissioners was that they were skeptical, but they were not dismissive. So, this isn't over. This is going to keep going on for some time. They've decided to hold more hearings. They will have regional hearings all around the country, and we will need to have all of you showing up to these hearings when they happen, and so on, and make sure that you are kept informed of when this happens. And I have sign-up sheet here. Asks for 4 pieces of information: name, address, phone number, email address. Please fill this out, and we'll keep you informed on what's going on with that petition.
Who are these commissioners? How does one get appointed? How many are there? And how could they be on the commission and be skeptical of a presentation about the Mark I?
Who are the commissioners and how do they get appointed? And can they be impeached? They are appointed by the president. I forget what the length term is. So, they haven't all been appointed by Obama, but the chairman has. I looked over, I think there are 5 of them. I could be wrong about the number. It's not a very big number. But this hearing was actually involving not only the commissioners, but also the regional directors all around the country. And I looked at the resumes of the various commissioners, and I had been afraid that they'd all be nuclear people from the industry. But actually I was surprised. There seems to be some good diversity there with people from various fields of engineering and physics. And so, I think maybe some of them have been involved with nuclear power for too long, and maybe some change is needed. But there wasn't anything I could point to that specifically said, here's a conflict of interest. This guy has got to go. And so, we'll be keeping an eye on that.